Right here, I have the Nothing Ear and Ear A wireless Bluetooth earbuds, but I can't show you. Yeah. About that in a moment. This video is different as it's more of a podcast and discussion with my guest. We share our thoughts, observations, analysis, and more from an audio engineer and audiophile's perspectives. Chapters are enabled to help you quickly find the topics that you're interested in. That's important because this video is not just a first impressions, it's a lasting resource. I designed it to be a reference that you can rely on for a long time, providing insights into the Nothing Ear and Nothing Ear A sound profile, how our ears work, codecs, and much more. And thanks so much to Nothing for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts on the Nothing Ear and Nothing Ear A. I can only discuss the sound, so I can't share the design, hardware, or other features, which I'll discuss in my full review. Still, this will be worth watching. And no, Nothing is not sponsoring this video. However, this video is sponsored by 1Password. With all the data breaches happening, our passwords are constantly being leaked and sold on the dark web. If you use the same passwords everywhere, all those accounts could be compromised at the same time, and that's not good. I've been using and paying for 1Password since the beginning of 2019, and I use it multiple times every day. 1Password is your digital fortress. It not only simplifies your online life by allowing you to create unique passwords for every account, but it also secures and stores your logins, credit cards, secure notes, and any other sensitive information you want to store. All of this is encrypted with industry-leading security, ensuring that your information is safe. Even if someone were to breach into their systems, all they'd find is a jumble of useless encrypted data. Your information is so secure that not even 1Password can see it. You only have to remember one strong account password to log into the well-designed app. It even supports biometric authentication, so you can log into it with Face ID or your fingerprint, and Audiophile makes it super fast and seamless to log into things. 1Password allows you to use and sync it across multiple devices, whether you're using Android, iOS, Mac, or PC. 1Password is offering an incredible 25% off their individual and family plans. Click the link in the description or scan this QR code to sign up for your free trial today. Now for our discussion with our guest, DMS, Mr. Douglas. He will provide the perspective of an audiophile, so he's gonna get all nerdy with all the frequency graphs and things like that. I'm providing the perspective of an audio engineer that mixes things, so I just fiddle and EQ things, so.
Yeah, and actually the funny thing is you've seen my measurement rig before, like the head and torso guy. It's named Brandon.
Really?
Yeah, I don't remember where we decided that, but we were like, let's name it after Brandon. He's got good ears.
Because I would say, I think I hear something in this certain frequency. Do you hear anything there?
That's exactly where this is. Oh, if you look at this dip right here, they're literally exactly that. So the measurement rig is also named Brandon, after Brandon.
You'll bring some of the data there, and I'll just share some of my observations from just listening to music.
That sounds good to me.
I don't know if you have the same feeling. Is this just the ear too? But actually listening to it and comparing them side by side, I started noticing that there's quite a bit of a difference in there.
Oh yeah.
It's not dramatic per se, but it's enough to make it feel more like a refinement to me. The ear 2 sounds really good, and you helped work on fixing some issues with it.
Yes, that was actually really fun.
But there were some things that became more apparent once I listened to it side by side with the ear, and I noticed that it was a little bit more harsh on the high end, or a little bit buzzier, and I noticed on the ear that it sounded a little bit smoother on the high end, but I'm not sure if you noticed any of that in your measurements or anything.
I did actually. I guess a little bit thing to preface this. There's these two gray lines. These two gray lines are kind of the upper and lower limit of like what the population average ear is like. If something is within those lines, it's kind of close to what the average person's ear responds like sound-wise. So I have one here that's the original ear 2. You know, it's got a pretty good bit of bass, a little bit of dip in the lower mid-range. Goes up pretty decent amount of treble, pretty smooth across the board. But when we look at it next to the ear is a little bit more balanced. So it's kind of riding the middle line on bass, still a good bit of bass. If you have the bass boost turned off, now the bass boost is on, I learned by default. I didn't know that before.
Oh yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I listened to it at first and was like, this is a lot of bass. Went in the app, turned that off. I like the bass a lot more now. It has a smoother mid-range than the ear 2 does, because you don't have that dip in the low mid-range anymore. And I do think things like that can help with timbre feeling and all that kind of stuff, which is like how natural a sound is. And then once we get more into the treble, the ear is a bit more recessed than the ear 2 is around 3K, which is like the center of your ear's peak of hearing, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Compared to the ear 2, the ear is going to sound a little bit less noisy, a little bit less busy, but also some people really like ear gain. I really like that 3 kilohertz ear gain region also, so it's going to kind of come down to preferences there. But aside from that, they're pretty similar from there on up throughout the upper treble.
And it's nice that you have the advanced EQ available that continues in the ear.
Oh yeah.
So that's great for audiophiles or mixing engineers or tinkerers like me. I notice as well that, and maybe this is what you're seeing in your graphs as well, but ear 2 has a little bit more of a papery type of sound to it, kind of the 800 to maybe like 3K range, almost like you get like a drumstick.
Yeah.
Hit something with a piece of paper on top of it, and it kind of has a little bit more of that kind of sound. It feels like that has been smoothed out, or that's removed on the ear, so it sounds a little bit more natural, and maybe that's what you're referring to before.
Yeah, I think so. I think between that and then the slightly more linear lower mid-range, I think you're getting better overall of like that timbre noise, it being more natural. I'm really glad they're keeping that advanced EQ.
That's a huge thing. Like even other well-known audio brands only have like 4 or 5 band EQ. So this one having specific frequencies that you can reach and adjusting Q levels, which is like really in the weeds for most people. But the fact that I have the ability to do that is nice. I don't have to use a third-party program to make that work.
Right.
Bass boost is definitely something that's new to this generation of earbuds. It makes a lot of sense to me because most people probably won't want to go into that advanced EQ setting and mess with things or know what they're doing with it. So as a whole, I think it has a really good starting point. If you may not like as much of a typical audiophile sound and you want a little bit more there, but still within range, and it feels a little bit more tasteful than some other options that are out there, but you also have the ability to really crank up the bass a lot and go outside of range.
Oh yeah, which there are people who will want to do that. There are some wild bass heads out there.
Yeah.
You know who you are.
But it doesn't seem like it's messing with the high end so that it's destroying it. Like I normally would hear another bass forward where like the high end just becomes like a dark, muddied mess.
That happens far too often. And I think that that's also because a lot of IEMs just don't have very linear treble.
Right.
They'll just be like that, and it just, everything falls apart. Speaking of treble differences, the ear A, right out of the gate, I actually would have liked the ear A more if it had the advanced EQ.
Wow, that's interesting. When I listened to it initially, I found it to have a little bit more of that buzzier sound.
It's that 3 kilohertz range. So 3 kilohertz, I'll pull both these up here. This is the ear in blue and the ear A in yellow. The ear A has a bit more of that 3 kilohertz region in the treble. I like that ear gain. So for me, I really like the sound of the ear A, but again, I would pull down that treble region around 5K and probably a little bit above that also if it had the advanced EQ. Since it doesn't, you could essentially tune the ear to be however you want. You could tune the ear to have that same profile. Between the two, the ears can be my pick, but by just default tuning, I kind of like the ear A, especially with the bass boost off. I'm not a bass head, but you know, just a little bit of bass is nice. Tasteful bass. I do think it was smart for them to do 2 different treble tunings because you're going to hit a much wider range of people that way, especially because the population average preferences is it's a window, it's a range.
From what I see on the graph there, the ear, the bass on it with the bass boost off is sitting right in the center of the range.
It is actually, yeah, with the bass boost off, it is on the dead center of what the population average will prefer. That's pretty good, if you ask me.
Well, I mean, that's perfect because that gives them a lot of flexibility if you want to use the bass boost feature.
For some reason, it's too much bass. If you're one of the 20% of people that prefers less bass, you can always just pull it down a little bit with the EQ.
I don't know why you do that.
I think just having that option is really nice, and I wish more things did that.
Do you know how much the ear A is?
I don't. I actually don't know what the price is for either of these. I assume that it's got to be fairly inexpensive.
I can't say it in this video, but it's $100.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
When you think about how much you can get out of it for only that amount.
I can't think of anything else at that price point that I would recommend over ear A.
For the price, it's a pretty decent sounding earbud. Probably better than most other earbuds at a much higher price. I know there was one that I reviewed recently that costs, I think it was like $300. I think ear A sounds better than it.
I mean, up to this point, I felt like the ear 2 is like one of the best wireless in-ears on the market.
A lot of people would disagree with you on that one. I've heard about it, but I disagree with them.
Well, that's the thing. It all depends on what their HRTF is also. So in-ears, you're going to experience so much more variation from person to person because you're bypassing this part of your anatomy.
So a lot of my viewers probably won't know what HRTF is. Can you explain what that is?
Oh, I'm sorry. This isn't going to make it too much better. It stands for head-related transfer function. Basically, it's if you were to put a microphone in your ear and take thousands of measurements around your head, you could get a map of what your hearing is like. With that map, you can kind of determine how certain things are going to sound to you, which is why some things might sound a certain way to you and sound a different way to me or a different way to Brandon. From what I've heard and from, your experience describing things to me, it sounds like you have an ear that's pretty close to the population average. The things you describe are close to how this measures. But that HRTF is essentially a map of how the ear sounds.
Like different rooms have different shapes, and because of that, they have different sounds or like reverb and all that other stuff. So a speaker will sound different in each room.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And you get more consistency with over-ear headphones. You're using all of the full anatomy of your ear, but when you're putting something in your ear, you're bypassing all this stuff on the outside, but your brain still expects this. So since your brain is expecting this, it's kind of up to whatever you're putting in your ears to match what your natural's ear sound is like. And that's where things start to get really tough. That's where you end up with a lot more variance with something in your ear than with something outside of your ear.
From a mixing engineer perspective, a lot of times I think of earbuds kind of like microphones. If I'm using a microphone on a guitar cab or something like that, I want to find the right microphone that requires me to not EQ it as much.
Yep.
And so you can certainly EQ a lot of things and get the sound that you want, and that's certainly helpful. And I do that a lot with a lot of earbuds out there, but ideally you want to find an earbud where you don't have to tinker with it too much, or if you do, it's very like light. These are pretty close to that. There's just slight adjustments there. A lot of people will bring up the idea that sound is subjective. I agree to an extent. I think there's a range.
Oh yeah.
Like it's like when I mix a concert or whatever, it's not going to be like, I'm going to mix it to sound muddy. I'm mixing it to be within a general range that I believe will be accommodating to most people and most people will like. Things are just sounding balanced. That's a lot of the approach that I go to with earbuds. If I can find one that EQs well, where I can manipulate it and it accepts that adjustment, well, I think that's a good earbud. And if I don't have to adjust it much at all, then it's an especially good one. And I think that this is the case for me as a mixing engineer.
It is a range, and that's why we have these upper and lower limits when measuring things, is because it shows like what the average population person is going to like. But the thing is, the average person isn't everyone. It's a lot of people, but it isn't everyone. But I get what you mean. The same thing is like with this microphone. I demoed a ton of microphones because everyone's voice is a little bit different, and on a lot of microphones that are very neutral, my voice sounds very nasally. I tried every microphone I could until I found one that I didn't need to use EQ with that didn't sound like I was talking like this.
It's like when everyone suggests the SM7B. I really don't like that microphone on most people's voice.
Yep.
Anyways, I digress. So I think the idea is that one of the benefits that they have, at least with the ear model, is that they have an advanced EQ to allow you to get the sound even if you're out of the average, which is something that you can't get with most other earbuds, unfortunately. So I think that's good. This might be kind of weird, especially because I don't think Kryn preferred the ear 2 as much.
Yeah, mostly for timbre, and I get it.
Is that the papery sound that I'm hearing?
Yeah, kind of like about how natural things are. I think that Kryn would have preferred it if it had a little bit less treble over, well, like 3 kilohertz and over.
Interesting.
Because that would be a little bit closer to like some of the projects he's put out, like Project Red or Dusk or things like that.
It's weird because I just got his new IEMs in, and in many ways, I'm like, okay, these sound more alike than they don't. And his actually,
yeah, they're pretty similar.
On default, actually has more bass.
Kryn loves his bass.
Yeah, and I mean, I get it. I like it a little bit more too, but his is definitely more smooth, but it's kind of crazy that we're able to get a little bit more of an IEM, a wired IEM type tuning at a wireless earbud. I know you're used to your custom EQ on the ear 2, but if you were to think of that as a default starting point, what would you think about these two?
Assuming we're turning off the bass boost and comparing to the default profile on ear 2, I prefer some things about ear and I prefer some things about ear 2. I prefer everything on ear from like 2K down, but I prefer the treble on ear 2 in that 3 kilohertz region.
Got it.
But both of those things are things I would correct with the advanced EQ anyway, and I think both of these are close enough to the population average. I do think that a lot of people will probably like the ear more, and I think that people will probably like the timbre, how natural that sound is more on the ear because of the corrections made in that lower mid-range area. For ear A, that is an entirely different story because I didn't realize that's where the price was on it. So at that price, that is really, really compelling. You could, even though it doesn't have the advanced EQ, it still does have some basic EQ options. I would probably be happy listening to it without EQ, but if I just did like the treble reducer slightly on it, I feel like that would make me a lot happier with the Ear A. Either way, it's pretty dang good at that price. That's pretty nuts. I think it'll be an easy recommendation.
Absolutely. Oh, and you even said like the Ear 2 was a great option for the money. And that's like,
oh yeah,
the clear disclaimer. You can certainly get better sound for more money when the Ear 2 was what, like $150 before?
Yeah.
And other options are like $300 or more dollars. It's pretty crazy how good of a sound you're able to get for the money. So for the value,
oh yeah,
I think it was definitely a standout.
Ear 2, especially after I've dialed in my own custom EQ with it using the advanced EQ in the app, I would take that over like easily $1,000 wireless IEMs.
Because I have an interesting thought about codecs, and I wonder what you think before I share my opinion. The Ear has both LDAC and LDHC, which is a slightly higher bandwidth above 1 megabit per second compared to the 990. So that gets you to 24-bit 192 kilohertz. While the Ear A only gets LDAC, so that's 24-bit 96 kilohertz, 990 kilobits per second. I wonder what your thoughts are on how important codecs are. Like, I know some audiophiles will really like it, and they like being able to have like the widest bandwidth possible, which is certainly nice to have, but how much of importance you would rank that amongst other things?
I think that once it's past a certain bit rate, codecs are just a measuring contest. I don't think that people can really hear much of a difference past like 500 or 600, realistically. And that's only if you're comparing things side by side. If you walk into a trade show floor and you're listening to a sound system, you're not going to say, oh, this sounds like Spotify instead of Tidal. If you listen to the two side by side, you might notice a difference, but you're not going to walk in and immediately know which is which. I don't really think it matters that much. I think that at this point, both of them far exceed the bit rates in which people are really going to substantially notice any sort of difference, even trying them side by side, because it really isn't that much of a bandwidth difference. It's pretty dang close. I do think that it's nice that both of them get to the range that they do. I think they're definitely exceeding a sweet spot to where it's more than enough bandwidth for the vast majority of things.
I mean, I wouldn't go as far as saying that you can't hear a difference between Spotify and like maybe Apple lossless.
I think you definitely can.
I'm outside the norm.
Yeah.
Most people can't hear that. I strongly believe that tuning matters far more than codecs.
Yes.
It's like a lipstick on a pig.
Yeah.
You can have like the best codec and bandwidth possible, but if it's tuned poorly, it just doesn't matter.
And at this bandwidth, you will benefit from things like Apple Music. Will the average person notice? Probably not, but the people who really care are gonna appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. When they're looking at stuff, don't fall for just codecs. It's important to make sure that it is tuned well as a starting point.
With almost all audio products, the frequency response and how that matches up to your preferences is king. And then it's going to be all these other things like, battery life and sound features and ANC performance and comfort and all that stuff. And then codecs.
I'm noticing that there might be a change that's happening in the audiophile space, because for me, as I'm an audio engineer, I'm not an audiophile. Like, I'm a mixing engineer. So I'm okay with EQing things. The vibe that I hear from a lot of audiophiles is that you don't EQ things, but I'm hearing
it varies.
People like you and Resolve that it's not that big of a deal. Like, just EQ it.
I like EQing something if I can retain that EQ on it. So like Ear 2, again, I like that I can EQ it and it bakes the EQ in. If I connect to my laptop, it's still EQ'd. If I connect to, a little portable music player, it's still EQ'd. If I have like a wired over-ear headphone, I don't like to EQ it because then I have to set up that EQ profile on my laptop and my phone and my desktop, and I have to find a way to make it work with a record player and all these things just to get the same sound. So I like EQ a lot more for a product like this that's digital, where I can save that EQ and just use it consistently everywhere. I think that translates to a lot of audiophiles these days, so I think that a lot of people complain about using EQ for a wired thing you'll take on the go. But for something like this that's wireless and fully digital, EQ is 100%. Like, it just makes sense because it's being tuned digitally anyway with EQ, so you might as well use it to get the best sound you can.
That's actually a really good argument. Like, you like kind of sold it to me that maybe I should be using the Ear more. I hate using a third-party EQ on Android because that's the only one that works. I use Wavelet for fixing things, but you don't have that option on iOS. So having it baked into the earbud because it's the app and it's doing the programming and stuff like that in the earbud is actually really compelling. I'm actually surprised that That did not register for me before, but that's actually a big deal. Hey, so I realized that there's one thing that we didn't cover, and it was actually the driver size. And I think that we can actually talk about that a little bit. It's actually smaller a little bit than the Ear 2, but I don't think that actually matters. It's almost like a megapixel race to me. Like it's just like numbers, but I wonder what you think about that.
I honestly think that very few things about the drivers actually matter outside of how they perform for like active noise canceling. So for a wireless IEM, the things that really matter on the driver is like what kind of headroom that driver is capable of producing without distorting. So for active noise canceling, that's important because you want to be able to cancel out all that extra noise and then produce your music on top of that and not have the thing be distorting like crazy. But the size of the driver realistically has nothing to do with that. And the only reason that a lot of wired in-ears use multiple drivers is to try and achieve a certain tuning profile, which on wireless IEMs, you just do that digitally anyway. They're all doing it with DSP. Do driver size or types really matter in a true wireless digital IEM? I don't really think they do personally, honestly, at all.
So again, it's another case of it matters more how it's tuned.
100% matters more how it's tuned. No one's going to, put on a set of wireless in-ears that are tuned the same way and be like, oh, this one's using a balanced armature. No, the one that's tuned better is going to sound better, and that's the end of it.
All right, well, thanks so much to DMS for joining me, sharing his audiophile squiggly line,
wiggly air and nerdy things.
And thanks to the measuring rig, Brandon.
Oh yeah, we'll put in a shot of him right here. Thanks, dude. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me. So, what are your thoughts? Any questions that you have? Let me know in the description. Let's have a nice discussion over there. I'm sure DMS will be there to help out with answering some of the questions. Make sure to go follow him over here. Here's a playlist of all my audio reviews, and here's a link to my review for the Nothing Ear and Ear A once it's posted. And of course, there are links down below in the description once they're available for purchase. Thanks for watching. This is Tech Today. Until next time.